Evil once again stalks the globe. The horrific murders at Bondi Beach outrage us all, just as we thought we were inured to further distress. Innocent people were slaughtered, families were shattered, and a public celebration became a scene of terror, simply because the participants were Jews celebrating Hanukkah. After tragedies like this, we search for answers and causes. We talk about freedom of speech, about radicalization, and about religion. But where discussion of freedom of speech reaches a point of dispute, it is over where freedom ends and incitement to violence begins. Even the most avid of free speech campaigners will draw the line at incitement to violence. But if violence begins after speech that is still legal, speech that expresses anger, grievance, or political opposition, should that speech be banned too? It is legal, if in my view incorrect, to say you do not support the State of Israel, or that its founding was an illegitimate seizing of land from existing communities. Equally, it's clearly and rightly illegal to support Hamas, a proscribed terrorist organisation committed to eliminating Jews and dissenters through the most extreme violence. Article 7 of the Hamas Covenant of 1988 says, "The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews. The stones and trees will say, O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." Article 15 states, "The day that enemies usurp part of Muslim land, jihad becomes the individual duty of every Muslim. In face of the Jews' usurpation of Palestine, it is compulsory that the banner of jihad be raised." Does the belief in the former principle inevitably lead to the second? Does holding a divisive political view lead someone to pick up a gun and kill strangers simply because they are Jews or of a different religion? Billions of people hold strong political and religious beliefs and never commit violence. The step from belief to violence and murder is not inevitable. It is a moral choice. Since the Bondi attack and others, including the Heaton Park synagogue attack, attention has quickly turned to Islam. Is Islam compatible with Western society? Can Islam ever be peaceful? Is it a threat to the West itself? The latter was committed by an Islamist terrorist, and the gunman in the former pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. The vast majority of terror incidents that have occurred in the West in the past few decades have been driven by Islamic extremism. So does the Quran incite violence? Well, the Quran contains passages such as, "So when you meet the disbelievers in battle, strike their necks until you have thoroughly subdued them, then bind them firmly, and those who disbelieve in our verses, we will drive them into a fire. Every time their skins are roasted through, we will replace them with other skins so they may taste the punishment." But the Old Testament and the Bible contains passages such as, "Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant." Both texts contain violent language, and yet billions of Jews, Christians and Muslims read these books without any desire to harm anybody. We do not ban the Bible because most people understand that ancient texts are read with context, ethics and restraint. The problem is not speech or scriptures alone, it's actions. Debates can be had about the compatibility of Islam in Western societies. Former Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott, said this following the attack.
Some versions of Islam are not really compatible with life in a liberal, democratic, pluralist society. Strict versions of Islam are not consistent with, for argument's sake, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, democracy. You can believe in the virgin birth and still support liberal democracy.
However, Mr. Abbott also told the BBC this.
In Australia, and indeed in quite a few other countries, including Britain, there has been far too much tolerance of anti-Jewish hate speech. We haven't banned hate marches. We haven't prosecuted people for saying that the Jewish people of Israel should effectively suffer a new Holocaust. And if you hate them enough, we see atrocities like that we witnessed at Bondi Beach.
The pro-Palestinian marches we have seen almost every weekend since the 7th of October 2023 have been beset by ugly scenes, pro-Hamas and ISIS flags, anti-Semitic chants and outright attacks on Jews in the street. This is rightly punishable by law, and those who commit these acts must be held accountable. In my view, where Tony Abbott goes too far is by suggesting that clamping down on these marches you would deter the evil Islamists dedicated to violence who carried out these despicable acts. Importantly, the person who bravely intervened and disarmed the attacker, or one of the attackers, is a Muslim of Syrian descent. Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a 43-year-old fruit shop owner and father of two, went and attacked the gunman, wrestling away his weapon and forcing his retreat. He was shot multiple times for his bravery. His father said, Ahmed was driven by sentiment, conscience and humanity. Well, I'm joined now by the Director of Legislative Affairs at the Free Speech Union, Sam Armstrong, and my panel, John Redwood and Matthew Stadlen. Thank you very much for coming in this evening. It's very hard to defend free speech when free speech seems to be at the beginning of a process that leads to people shooting innocent people of a different religion.
Absolutely. But as ever, we have to focus on precisely what has occurred here. And in my view, banning the so-called speech that led this individual or these individuals to commit the heinous acts of violence they did is just as silly, just as foolish, just as puerile as banning them from holding the guns that they did, or banning people from holding guns, which is to say that actually these individuals shot and killed a 10-year-old girl, an 84-year-old Holocaust survivor, because they hold a deep-seated, awful, tremendously evil sense that they wish to commit violence towards others, deeply within themselves. And the idea that the idea that banning other people from speaking is any more likely to end violence than banning ordinary Australians, ordinary Brits from owning and possessing guns, it is just as silly. In actual fact, what we need to do is be very clear that there are, regrettably, tens of thousands of people in our society that hold views that it is acceptable to shoot and fire weapons at Jews for no other reason than they are Jewish.
But is the comparison with the guns that foolish? Because if you look at gun crime in the UK, it is much lower than in the US because we have very tight gun control. If we could stop these attacks by being less tolerant, do you think that would be a price worth paying?
Well, firstly, we should be clear. There are 70-odd million people in the United Kingdom, the vast majority of whom have been able to withstand the ordinary debates of free speech for 2 millennia or more. Secondly, there is no evidence whatsoever that restraining speech does anything to constrain extreme ideas. In fact, where there is evidence, it is pointed in the other direction. Never forget, the Weimar Republic had amongst the toughest restrictions on free speech of anywhere in the Western world, and that led directly to the emergence of Nazi ideology. And thirdly, there is no reason whatsoever, in my view, to engage in the summary ending of ancient and precious freedoms at a time in which you are admitting millions of people over a period of a decade or more who simply don't believe in these ideas without having first attempted to deal with mass migration into this country.
Matthew, do you think that Tony Abbott is right, that if there'd been a tougher approach to the marches, it is less likely that these things would have happened?
Very difficult to say, but what I would say is that we know that radicalisation can take place in people's bedrooms. So access to the internet, when you are vulnerable in the way that someone who carries out horrific acts of evil is, access to the internet can be incredibly dangerous.
So what is the answer? Because it's going to be almost impossible to limit people's access to the internet unless you go down the route of totalitarian regimes. So Iran and China can do that, but the British state would find that almost impossible. How do you try and deal with this problem at its root causes?
It's very, very difficult to regulate the internet. And we've seen that, particularly, I would suggest, since the emergence of Elon Musk as the owner of one of the primary digital public spaces. It seems to me to be a free-for-all to such an extent. There's so much hatred, so much racism, so much homophobia, so much anti-Semitism, so much misogyny. The vast swathes of users have left the platform or no longer really use it. My view is quite clear, though. We have laws in this country. You cannot, as you've already said, incite violence. You cannot, and this has been the case for some time, incite racial hatred. You cannot incite religious hatred. And by the way, that is about people. It's not about criticising religion, which is fundamental, I think, to our democracy, the ability to criticise ideas. But these things have been in place for some time. Where we found it incredibly difficult is with the emergence of the internet, where there are millions of day-to-day users who, many of whom simply do not obey the law.
John, Matthew raises a point that I think is very important, that you can talk about the individuals but should protect freedom of religion. I spent a bit of time this afternoon reading the Bible, and you look through and you find there are some terrible things in the Bible. Of course, infamously, the blood libel, his blood be on our heads and on the heads of our children in the end of St. Matthew's Gospel, but much harsher things as well in the Old Testament. How do you differentiate between the individual and the religion? Because it seems to me that lots of people start blaming Islam rather than evil people.
I think as the law intends to do, and I think we have a law enforcement problem more than we have an inadequacy of law problem. And Matthew's rightly pointed out the offences, and we know people are committing them a lot of the time, a limited minority, and they are encouraging people to disrupt our societies in the way that we've tragically seen in Australia. So I think you go after the hate preachers. If hate preachers are applying to get in this country, we need to do a better job on saying, no, you're not a suitable person to come or even to visit. Where we've got our own hate preachers already here, they should be investigated. And if they are deliberately perverting youth by saying it is the right thing to do to pursue anti-Semitism to the point of violence, then they should be prosecuted. Prevent is the strategy. We want it to be more successful, and I think it's cross-party. I think Labour and Conservative both agree that these outrageous acts are terrorist acts. They are serious crimes, and the instruction or the mentoring of these people are also crimes. We need to tackle it, and we need to watch where people are going to a foreign country to train, because when they come back into our country, that is the point where we ought to be taking criminal action against them.
So part of the problem is immigration, and we need a tighter immigration problem policy to know who is coming in.
You've got to selectively through your intelligence, and I know there are hundreds or thousands of possible people, so you're going to need quite a bit of resource. There is already quite a lot of resource. But you've also got the advantage now of fast search and AI and all the rest of it, so you should be able to see movements electronically.
So Matthew, to what extent do you think the technology that makes this possible also makes it possible to police?
We've had a massive backlash in recent months, in fact, really since this government came into power, against Keir Starmer's Labour government. And that has been including suggestions that it is almost totalitarian, that is anti-free speech. Actually, as I think I've correctly identified, we are in relatively new territory, which is that people can say things much more easily in public because of their access to digital media, to social media platforms. But the law does still apply on those platforms, and it's incredibly important to make that point. By the way, on mass immigration...
I just want to give Sam the last word, because we're about to come to conclusion. Do you broadly agree with what Matthew's been saying, that actually we have got laws that can protect us, and we should be using those properly, even if they do stop people saying things that, though free speech, go beyond a certain level?
Well, where I agree is that I think Tony Abbott is wrong, that actually the legislation that we have is perfectly adequate. And insofar as it has deficiencies, it is in the wrong direction. Remember where stirring up hatred offences have led. It's Jamie Michael, a former Royal Marine, that was wrongly prosecuted for stirring up racial hatred for a perfectly innocent Facebook post. Where I do think we do have a problem is around the mass importation of individuals that hold a view that it is acceptable or at least understandable that you might want to shoot at, in a mass level, Jewish people in our country. And where I see a problem is the continued false compassion that comes about where you import people by virtue of the fact they break into our country illegally without any sense of who they are.
And ignoring the freedoms of Jews to lead a decent life here.
Thank you very much.